Welcome back to Not From Boston. I'm here with our guest this week, Jonathan D. Cohen, the author of Losing Bet, America's Reckless Bet on Sports Gambling. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me. Happy March Madness to you and yours.
Yeah. Congrats on the book. I'm very excited to talk about it. Sports betting is something that, at least I think my co-host feels the same way. I feel very strongly that, yeah, we have a bit of a problem on our hands. So just tell us about the book.
Yeah, I mean the book. So it losing big as you mentioned. So my last book. I'll start there. My last book is on the history of American state lotteries, and that came out in 2022. And that was a long process. I started working on that book in 2015, and then while I was working on it in 2018, of course, is the Supreme Court decision that basically opened the floodgates for states to legalize betting on sports. And I'm doing the press tour for my last book in 2022, 2023, and people keep asking me about sports betting. And of course, I'm a good interviewer or interviewee. I, do my research and I'm caught up on sports betting, blah, blah, blah. And it sure seemed like something weird was going on, or like at least something crazy was going on that was changing American sports, American culture, American society. And basically no one was writing a book about it, and at some point I decided, all right, screw it, I'll write it, and sort of pursued the topic, and almost as an exercise just for myself, as an excuse to look into it in more detail, but also with the sense that something was going on that needed to be investigated a little bit.
Yeah, and I had noticed in just preparing for this that you had written a couple of pieces for the Washington Post that also talked about gambling and the relationship with the economy, which also I thought was really interesting. Did writing those pieces kind of fold into the process of writing this book, or did those come beforehand?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the dirty secret. I guess some people like really pride themselves as a writer and really want to
Mhm.
write books, and I sort of write books for the excuse of like doing interviews like this,
Yeah.
it's sort of as a credentialing device of
Okay.
like, okay, I wrote the book, I did the research. Yeah, I think the book is great. I think everyone should read it, blah, blah, blah. But what I'm interested in doing is establishing myself as a public intellectual on the issue. And yeah, you're right. Like being able to write a 900 word op-ed piece is sort of a proving ground for, okay, do I have something interesting to say? Is there some major publication that will publish it? Might that be an indication that I have more to say and maybe a book's worth of things to say with, a little bit of research?
Did you have a chance? I saw on this past Sunday, John Oliver did a whole
Yeah.
segment. I was very excited about that, and I'm sure you were too.
Yeah, I mean, I was excited, and then I also like know half the people who are in it. Like, he doesn't do like interviews or guests or
Yeah,
anything, but it's like he's like making fun of all these people in these clips, and I'm like, oh, I know less. Like, I know that guy, you
yeah,
know?
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his show, so that was just really nice for me. A friend of mine texted me. I was like, "Hey, are you watching Last Week Tonight?" And I was like, "Yeah, of
Well,
course I am."
okay, so the problem was this is actually the second time this has happened to me where he did a lotteries segment. It
Yes,
must have come out. It must have come out around the same time as my dissertation. So he had no reason that he should have contacted me or anything. My
yeah,
book was like 3 years away, but it was like, all right, I missed my window. And then now he does the sports betting one like a month before my next book comes out. It's like, all
yeah,
right, I just need to get on the outline of whatever program they're covering, and then three
right.
years from now for my next book, I'll know like I can time it a little bit better.
Yeah, you just need to sync those calendars up, and
Right. Yeah, exactly. John, just call me. Just call me next time,
yeah.
please. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, you mentioned like kind of how we got here, how sports gambling became legalized or normalized, and it had to do with the Supreme Court. And I was wondering, can you speak more to like what that decision was?
Yeah, and you use two important words, and I think they're actually two different things, but legalized and normalized. So I'm just going to talk about
Yeah.
legalized for a second, um, which is I'm a historian, but I'll try to spare as much of the
Mhm.
history as I can. But basically, in 1992, states were like thinking about legalizing sports gambling. It wasn't the sports gambling that we know today, but it was a different form. But states were thinking about legalizing it, and in response, Congress basically stops them from doing so. It passes this law called the Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act that doesn't say sports gambling is illegal. It says states are not allowed to legalize sports gambling.
Mhm.
Okay. And then in 2018, this is like a classic Supreme Court decision where it's nominally about gambling, but it actually is about some other issue entirely. So nominally, this was about whether sports gambling is legal. It was actually about states' rights and about what's called the anti-commandeering statute from the 10th Amendment, the degree to which Congress can tell states what to do.
Mhm.
And Congress, or in the Supreme Court decision, the court decided that Congress could not tell states whether or not they can legalize sports gambling. Therefore, PASPA, the Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act of 1992, was unconstitutional. Therefore, states, as of May 14th, 2018, were allowed to choose whether or not they want to legalize sports betting.
Yeah. Okay. And as of now, I think it's 38 states that have.
39 sometime this year when Missouri
Oh,
figures it out.
really?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I remember there being a ballot measure a couple of years ago in California,
Yeah,
here,
did not go
and
well.
no, it failed, and I'm
Yeah.
a little surprised by that. I feel like it's only a matter of time before California also.
This is what's crazy. And we can talk about sort of the size and scale of sports betting today. But
Yeah.
however big you think it is, it's going to basically double when Texas and California legalize sports betting.
I mean, the amount of money, the amount of revenue that New York and New Jersey have generated in the last couple of years from sports betting is or gambling as a whole is just shocking. Truly like ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, and,
Uh,
and New Jersey being an interesting, or sorry, New York being an interesting case because they tax it so heavily.
yeah.
But we'll get into all this. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean that was actually a really so that was an interesting thing about the pieces in the post that I had read because um you deconstructed kind of one of my least favorite arguments in favor of sports betting, which is that it's going to happen anyways. So states should legalize it and take a cut. But that's on paper, that argument I think to some might make sense. But can you break down the problems there?
Yeah, I mean, of course it is true. Like sports gambling was happening anyway, is happening anyway, and was happening before 1992. It was happening before 2018, 100%. Um, and so a lot of this was happening offshore with unregulated casinos, some of it happening with your neighborhood bookie. Like, no question, there was illegal gambling happening anyway, and there were and are some people who were gambling illegally who are now gambling in the legal market and
Mhm.
whose tax who are now their gambling is now raising tax revenue, now supporting state services in ways it wasn't before. Great, but it's so naive to say, and this was implied with sports gambling as it was with lottery, that basically we're not actually going to increase the size of the pie that much. All we're doing is changing the distribution.
Mhm.
The implication is we're not actually going to increase the number of gamblers or increase the total amount gambled. All we're doing is taking it from illegal and offshore and making it legal and tax raising. And that is completely insane, to suggest that there aren't people who weren't already gambling or who wouldn't have otherwise been gambling who are obviously now only going to start gambling because it is so accessible and so legal and so prevalent. So that's not about the revenue, but that's just about the argument, which is let's just at least acknowledge that you're not only going to capture this quote unquote lost revenue, you're also going to be creating new gamblers
Yeah.
that will be maybe gamblers for a long time.
So I guess this might be a broad question, but in your mind, what is the biggest problem with sports gambling?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take your broad question. I'll give you a broad answer, which is the we could talk about sort of the indicators of harm, the problems of rates of addiction and rates of insecurity, but the actual sort of root of the problem is a system, a sports betting system that is set up to create profit for sports books and tax revenue for states rather than to protect the well-being of players. That's like the 30,000 foot level. That's the problem, is
Mhm.
that it's not even designed to be extractive. It's designed to be allowed to be extractive, such that all these other problems that people are facing, individually, societally, etc., are all sort of downstream of this philosophical problem that it was rolled out really, really fast, and we were sort of the foxes were given control of the hen house, and these smaller problems that we can talk about the regulations that I would fix and problem gambling services that I would fund and so on are all downstream of this bigger problem, which is the mindset that the country has taken towards its sports betting infrastructure.
Yeah. And as a result, there's also like a startling lack of really any regulatory framework around protecting consumers.
So this is like one of those keywords. So whenever I talk to like someone in the sports betting industry, like from one of these companies
Mhm.
or a gaming association, they always whenever they say, "Oh, I think X state had the right level of regulation," that means it's not enough regulation. And
Yeah,
whenever they
right.
say this is too much regulation, they mean like you can just assume that when they think it's quote unquote right, that it's actually too little. So I don't want to imply that it's not regulated, that there aren't rules in place. The question is, are those rules doing enough to protect players rather than
Yeah.
to facilitate profits?
What I found really interesting is that when the Supreme Court made their decision, the commissioners of Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NFL, all together, and I think with a couple other sports leagues, put out a statement saying we think this is a bad idea, and this is dangerous for the sport or for sports in general. And now, fast forward 7 years, and all of the major sports leagues have deals in place with DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM. Uh, I guess baseball at the very like as an example, because this is a baseball pod and
Yeah, yeah.
baseball fans. Um, in the last few years, baseball has seen an increase in attendance and in revenue in the last couple of years. Whether or not that's tied to like the rule changes or to gambling specifically, maybe there's a relationship there. But if gambling helps with that engagement and growth, devil's advocate here, isn't that a good thing?
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, well, I'll start with the first part of your question about sort of the Supreme Court decision and sort
Yeah.
of the immediate aftermath, which is you're absolutely right about this incongruity, this what some might call a hypocrisy from
Yeah.
the sports league. I guess I'll use I'm not gonna put that word in your mouth. I said it, not you.
Oh, I was
Um,
gonna say it in the next
Okay, great.
question.
So in 2014, right, just to take you back, Adam Silver writes this really notable op-ed in the New York Times, basically calling for the legalization of gambling. Rob Manfred, commissioner of the MLB, comes out the year later and doesn't say explicitly the same thing, but basically agrees that like a new approach is needed. I don't know his exact words, but
Yeah.
it's suggesting that he's on board. Both companies become major investors in DraftKings and FanDuel. At the time, they're just daily fantasy companies, not sports gambling companies. But they again seems like they're willing to change. While that's happening, they are still involved in the lawsuit to uphold PASPA, and they're still the defendants in the Supreme Court decision. So basically, by losing the Supreme Court decision, they
Yeah.
won the right to offer legalized sports gambling.
Wow. I did not know that. So they were double dipping, basically. I mean,
Right. So it's Murphy v. NCAA was the name of the
yeah.
case, but it's NCAA and NFL and MLB and NHL because again, as long as gambling is illegal,
Mhm.
the leagues have to claim that they're against gambling
Yeah.
because it's illegal and it like threatens the integrity of their sport. The minute it becomes legal, now they can sort of embrace it and talk about it. So even though Adam Silver and Rob Manfred were sort of open to a new approach, legally, sort of policy wise, they can't actually indicate
Yeah.
that they've changed their position because of this perceived threat that illegal gambling poses to their product.
On this note, I actually want to share my screen for a second because I want to play just a brief clip um, from this originally aired in I think this time last year, March of last year, on the show Foul Territory. And I just want you to see if you can
Brought
find
to you by
what's.
BetMGM. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. I don't even have to play the clip then. I remember watching this live and just thinking like, yeah, what's that in the corner there?
Right. What was there was some tweet, maybe it was a Jeff Passan tweet or something. It was like not for news on this like Shohei Ohtani scandal and how this could have happened. We turned to our FanDuel expert calling in from our DraftKings studio. Like,
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, and The Athletic, which I love, is they're a great sports publication, also sponsored by BetMGM, and it's yeah, you run into this whole thing about the integrity of sports and the hypocrisy that exists now. Because I think it's harder to take sports media seriously when they critique great gambling, when they're also getting paid by gambling.
right.
Um, And if
Well,
DraftKings
yeah.
was thinking about sponsoring this podcast, they're not anymore.
Oh, they called me. They were like, please ask. Um, well, so all this is in service of a word that you used before that I promised that I was going to talk about, which is
Oh yeah.
normalization.
Yeah.
Which is the how do May 13th, 2018, sports gambling is illegal outside of Nevada, and then how do you, starting the following day when the Supreme Court decision comes down, and then states obviously start to get into the game, how do you create a nation of sports bettors? And how do you turn people who aren't comfortable with sports betting, who don't know what sports betting is, who don't know how it works, who maybe they've never played DFS before, so they actually aren't familiar with DraftKings and FanDuel because I guess their brains weren't alive in 2014 and 2015 when everyone else was getting into DFS. How do you turn this country into a country of sports fans into a country of sports bettors? And what you've shown, the media side is just one piece of it, which is you normalize the companies, you put them everywhere, you sort of make them unavoidable, and you just, in the process, turn a sports ecosystem into a sports gambling ecosystem, sort of subtly and without even knowing that all of a sudden you trust these companies because you see them every day.
Yeah. Siena College did a poll of about 3,000 people on their sports gambling habits and opinions. And kind of speaking to your point, one thing that was really interesting to me was the question, have you ever participated in a promotion on an online sports book in which you were awarded money for your participation? So one of those like bet $10, get $100 in bonus bets if your
No
team
sweat
wins.
first bet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh, so 70%, 77% of responders said, yeah, I've participated in one of those promotional things, which I think is like, it's where they kind of first get you.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, we can talk about the design of these promotions, but right, in addition to normalizing it sort of culturally, you need to do the work of getting people who haven't signed up yet enticed
Yeah.
to sign up. And so first of all, it makes sense. Lots of people, lots of companies, offer bonuses. So, your first order is free, whatever.
Right.
Sign up for our meal plan or meal delivery kit or whatever. The sort of insidious part. So they have these no sweat first bet. So the idea is that you bet up to whatever it's called, $500, $10, whatever.
Mhm.
Even if you lose your first bet, they'll give you your money back. So they're sort of actually hoping that you're going to win your first bet because from so many of the bettors I talk to, so many of them run into trouble sort of right away, and so many of them won their first bet. They
Yeah.
place a bet, they win their first bet. First of all, you get this immediate sense of overconfidence. That even if you know, like, wow, I got really lucky, like
Hmm.
the Brewers like should have lost that game, but I bet on them to
Right.
win, whatever. Even if you know deep down that you got lucky, it's so hard to just kick that dopamine, that you rush of dopamine that you get from winning, and this sense that, oh, I'm really good at this. This is so easy. I'm amazing. And this is
Yeah.
literally the plot of The Gambler by Fyodor Dostoevsky from 150 years ago. Like someone wins their first bet and then like gets addicted to roulette because she's just like chasing that high
Yeah.
over and over again. So this no sweat first bet is, first of all, they want to get you in the door, like you
Mhm.
said. They want you to place a bet, maybe a big one. They want you to win, but in the event that you don't worry, they'll make it up to you. You'll sort of get a second first attempt, and then you can sort of maybe get that dopamine again because you're getting the money back. So that's why this no sweat first bet is so important,
Mhm.
because because they know that if you win your first bet, that's how they get you, and they want you to win your first bet basically no matter what. So you get your no sweat, you get your money back. Oh, you just get a redo. Lo and behold, you're probably going to win that one. Maybe you'll win the one after, or maybe you don't win that one. Maybe you'll win one after that. All of a sudden, you have this sense of overconfidence that's going to be really, really hard to shake.
So then I guess kind of carrying that out, like I guess taking a little bit of a wider look, how does that, or I guess from what you've observed, how has that changed the culture for some fans around sports?
Yeah, I mean, it again. This is one of the other, maybe the other key way that we have the way we were transformed or transmogrified from a nation of sports fans into a nation of sports bettors is that we were sort of enticed. I'm talking we like the whole country, but like
Right.
lots of people, lots of
Mhm.
sports fans were enticed by these free bet offers.
Yeah.
And had it not been, and the language of about some of these have changed. I think it used to be like can't lose, and
Hmm.
then a bunch of advocates basically said you
Yeah.
can't say you can't lose. That's like violating all sorts of like principles about problem gambling, blah blah blah. So now it's no sweat, which is maybe just as bad, but maybe slightly better.
Right.
But again, all this was in service of like getting people in the door in
Mhm.
the first place and normalizing it, and getting you to download the app on your phone, turning sports watching into a two-screen experience where you have the phone on one with the gambling app on one hand and the TV open on the other, or your laptop or your stream, whatever. It, it's just their way of getting people in the door and getting them to start. And once they start, even if it's a small percentage of people who run into trouble, who lose a lot of money, if they can get enough people in the door in the first place, and even a small percentage of that large pie, can make them a lot of money.
Yeah. I've noticed from just over the years that especially with team sports, I've noticed just people around me are becoming, even if the team that you're rooting for wins, if a player's performance disrupts your parlay, for example, like the fan is going to be upset. And like the individualization of team sports, I think is like a really interesting thing that's kind of spawned off of this because I mean, you know, I mean, for me at least, and not that long ago, it was like, oh, the Red Sox win. Like, who cares that, Rafael Devers went 0 for 4? And now it's like, oh, well, Rafael Devers just cost me $200.
Right. Even
Um,
though the Red Sox won or
even though the
whatever.
Red, right.
Yeah. Right.
And which is why there have been some really funny, not, I mean, funny in like a sad way. Like, there have been really interesting stories about players in baseball and I think in other sports getting Venmo requests from fans who are like, you cost me this money on a bet. Like, pay me back
Right.
for it, which is crazy. But also, like, that barrier between the player and the fan is, I think this is creates some cracks. And basketball being a really good example because, unlike any other professional sport, no fans can't get any closer to players than they can in basketball. Like, literally, there are courtside seats, for example. And um, I've read articles about like NBA players and coaches kind of starting to worry about like their safety. Um,
Well, just to be put a fine point on it, when he was still the coach of the Cavaliers, some fan like barged into JB Bickerstaff's house and like was angry over like
Really,
losing bets. Yeah.
yeah, that so this is the kind of thing that like I mean, there's a lot to be worried about, I think, in terms of the addiction component and the financial like the devastating component of gambling addiction. There is also like, yeah, like I do genuinely worry that like someone's gonna get hurt.
So this is you used a phrase earlier, and I meant to double click on it when you brought it up,
Hmm.
but I didn't answer this part of your question about fan engagement.
Yeah.
And this is like the dark side of fan engagement. The light side, the bright side is, yeah, viewership for sports is up, or at least is not dropped off as fast as it might have otherwise had there
Right.
not been gambling. Studies show that if you have money on a game, you're much more likely to watch a game, especially if it's a blowout than you would have be otherwise, which is one of the reasons why the leagues were so excited after PASPA fell to get in on the gambling game. So the positive side of fan engagement is, yeah, baseball was like maybe falling off a cliff popularity wise, and like this is sort of like it got thrown a lifeline, a
Mhm.
little bit in terms of gambling, especially over the summer when there's nothing else to gamble on. There's no really
Yeah.
other sports going on before college football and the NFL start. The dark side is this is exactly what the leagues and Congress feared in the early 1990s, and the exact reason they enacted PASPA in the first place was the fear that uh, that people would no longer care about their teams to win. They would care about these other things. Senator Bill Bradley at the time says that we're going to turn athletes into roulette chips. Um,
Wow.
and and I mean, you brought up basketball. Basketball is interesting. My sense, I don't talk to a lot of Gen Z. I'm like 35 years old. That'd be weird,
Mhm.
but like I don't talk to a lot of that many young people. But like my sense is there's a lot more attachment to players than teams among sort of very young fans. So you got to wonder like how like whatever tenuous attachment people already had to teams in baseball or basketball, whatever, how much more tenuous is that
Right.
now that you're like not even betting on the team to win, you're betting on like a player here and there. So
Yeah.
why should anyone care about the Red Sox as an entity, as a laundry, as like as a jersey when your sports rooting interest is now about like this player on the Dodgers and that player on the Brewers and that player on the A's and that player on the Rays, and
Yeah.
like you're building a different parlay every night. Like, why should you care about the Red Sox? Why should anyone care about any team?
That's really interesting. I feel like I kind of came in as like the last wave of fans who like the idea of not rooting for the Red Sox but rooting for an individual player is just
Again,
that's
I think that's more of a basketball phenomenon than a baseball
well
phenomenon.
no,
But
I think
yeah, yeah.
there's definitely an element of it that is I think
Like all
true
of a
and
sudden I'm a big Alex Bregman fan. I mean, he's still a cheater, but like all of a sudden I'm a
right,
big
but I'm
Bregman
like, oh,
fan. You know
he's
what I
wearing
mean?
my
Yeah.
jersey. Like
Right.
but I mean the number of people like Shohei's a great example of like how many people are Dodgers fans now because Shohei Ohtani is wearing a Dodger
The
uniform.
country of Japan, like
Right.
in its entirety. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's I don't know, that's really interesting. But also I think going back to that Siena poll, when the question, have you ever placed a bet against your favorite team? 59% said yes. I thought that was really because I like maybe it's just because I'm like stuck in my ways, but like the idea of betting against your team is just like so against everything I personally believe.
Right. Well, so I watch more basketball than I do any other sport,
Yeah.
and I would say I mean I'm a Celtics fan. I'm from the Boston area,
Oh, cool.
and I know you're not, and that's the whole point.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
but the I do feel okay. So first of all, the reason to bet against your own team, right, is like it's sort of like a win-win scenario. It's like either you win your bet or the team
Yeah.
wins. And of course, there's that dream scenario where you bet on them against the spread, where they win the game and they cover or they don't cover the spread, whatever it is, so you
Mhm.
can win both. But then the other side of it is I do feel watching the Celtics, or watching a team that you watch a lot, that you like get a feel for them. It's like, you know what? Like you can watch see in the first quarter, be like, these guys don't have it tonight. Like I know Jaylen Brown is going to take a bunch of crappy shots and like
Huh.
only half of them are going to go in. So I wonder if people have this sort of they're betting against their team, not as a rooting interest, but like again, because, and this is part of the problem, we've
Yeah.
reduced sports fandom into yet another thing that's all about pecuniary gain. It's all about like how can you exploit your knowledge about sports for money rather than like the enjoyment of watching sports. And you're betting against your team
That's
because I know I can see it in the first quarter the Celtics don't have it tonight. I'm going to bet against them because I can make money off of them.
that is such a good point. And I think like um maybe I missed that kind of with sports betting because baseball is already so inundated with people trying to like flex their muscles statistically speaking. They're like, oh, here's WOBA and WAR and all of these other just kind of numbers to kind
Yeah.
of show. And but yeah, I think that is a trend that you see kind of in a lot of industries now in a weird way. Like I started out working in film, and in the film industry, you kind of see that as well, even though it's like, hey, this is a creative like art form. Like we're not really supposed to be data analyzing like it, but okay.
Yeah,
Uh,
not to suggest that like baseball was some pure
no,
like socialist anti-capitalist utopia by any means, obviously, but just
far
like
from it.
right, but at least like fandom,
Yeah,
I would like to think at least fandom was like actually had some love of the game, and it wasn't about okay, how can I make money off of Rafael Devers? It was like okay,
yeah,
I love Rafael Devers, he's awesome. Like I want to see him like hit the ball really far.
yeah. So just to because I know we gotta kind of wrap it up here, but my last question is, it's also a big question. Where do we go from here? Because the court of
Well, we're going
public
to
opinions,
California. We're going to California soon, whether you like it or not.
yeah, the court of public opinions divided. I mean, it's making states a lot of money. Um, I guess what can be done to kind of, if anything, to stem the harm that comes from
Yeah.
sports
This is a
gambling?
really tough one. This is a really tough one, and one that like my book already might seem out of date on this question, and it hasn't even come out yet.
Okay.
Which is there are like three camps. One is like everything's fine, leave it alone. Fine. I think that's crazy. Another
Yeah.
camp is like we need to just completely roll back the clock and prohibit it. I know, and like those people acknowledge like people are going to find ways to illegally gamble with
Yeah.
the genie's out of the bottle a little bit, but like we just need to shut it down completely. And then there's the middle camp where I find myself of like, okay, we could sort of, as you're implying, do better regulation, make some technocratic fixes, and make this safer. The problem is sports betting is really complicated, and like every sounds good on paper technocratic fix, if you once you dig into it,
Mhm.
you can find someone who probably knows a lot about sports betting who can tell you why it's actually not going to work or why it's a bad idea. Um, I
Well,
can give you an example
yeah.
if that's helpful. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it sounds totally insane that you should be able to bet on credit cards. You should be able to use a credit card for sports betting.
Yeah.
That sounds insane. There's a study from England, from Great Britain, that when the country enacted a ban on gambling on credit cards, it basically didn't do anything. People like you and me who are sort of, or I don't know about you, but I'm a casual like bettor. People like me who are casual bettors, I happen not to use my credit card for gambling. Everyone, I guess someone might find it convenient. Casual bettors who have no gambling problems, it stopped using their credit cards. People, but it was targeted at problem gamblers. The thesis was, okay, these people are betting with money they don't have. They're running up credit to
Mhm.
gamble. We should cut off them from betting with credit cards, and then they won't be able to have access to this money anymore, and they won't be able to gamble problematically.
Yeah.
What actually happened was these people are addicted gamblers, and by hook or by crook, they're going to find cash and they're going to find a way to bet. And
Right.
the credit card ban had basically no effect on them or their play.
Mhm.
So again, credit card ban sounds good on paper. In reality, has zero efficacy. So,
Mhm.
how many other ideas do I have and do I support and do I endorse in the book that, again, sound really good on paper? Oh, limit the number of deposits you can make in an hour. Make
Yeah.
companies like prove or ask gamblers to prove that they can afford how much they're betting. Limit the number of games and sports and options of things to bet on. All those things sound good, and I actually do support all of them and would like to try them. But
Mhm.
I'm just trying to have the humility to acknowledge that they haven't been tried, and that there's a chance that like this credit card experiment in Great Britain, they just completely flop, and we need
Right.
to like try something else. But those are the kinds of ideas that I like,
Mhm.
hoping, please God, that they actually work.
What about something like limiting advertising? Like, maybe no sports betting logos like on stadium walls or on, TV, like
Yeah.
limiting when sports betting ads can air.
Yeah, totally. And that's so it's a good one because that's often the first domino to fall. And there are a couple states that are basically thinking about doing exactly this, including Maine.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, I think that'd be great. Or I think it could be great. Again,
Mhm.
there's no evidence that like that will work one
Right.
way or the other. Part of the problem is the purpose of advertising, as we've already discussed, is the normalization of sports betting and
Mhm.
making and the familiarization of these companies. And of course, there are young people who are, watching sports for the first time who are sort of still being acclimated and it's still becoming normalized for them. But even like talk about the genies out of the bottle or whatever, like the
Yeah.
normalization genies out of the bottle too. And like people already sort of established know these companies and they've established themselves as known brands such that I'm not saying more advertising is not doing any harm, but like the peak of the harm from advertising was happening over the last 5 years, and it's sort of not only is advertising volume diminishing, but the
Mhm.
effect of the advertising is, I feel, also sort of diminishing. And it's
Yeah.
meaning a regulation is not as impactful as it would have been 5 years ago. Not that it wouldn't be impactful at all, but it would have really helped to like some countries have this like a ban on celebrity endorsements. Like you can't have like a celebrity endorse
Yeah.
gambling in an ad. That would have been really helpful in 2019. But lo and behold, it's 2025.
Jonathan Cohen, thank you so much for your time. Losing Big is out on April
April
1st.
1st. Yeah.
Awesome. So be sure to check that book out. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Go Sox.